Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers for today's session. They are David Braun, Global Head of Connected Health and Device Business Solutions at Merck, and Emma Vitalini, Head of Global Digital Health Technology at Amgen. Thank you and welcome both to the webinar. Before we go into the questions for the webinar, I'd just like to get the first poll of three underway. We'll be looking at the results a little way into the webinar, but let's get the question for the poll ready now. So if our viewers want to give that some thought and get ready to record their answers to the question, we'll be sharing what we all think about that in a few minutes. So the question for the first poll is, what is your biggest challenge in converting digital health data into HTA-ready evidence? So that what is your biggest challenge in converting digital health data into HTA-ready evidence? Do give that some thought. Please vote, and we'll be looking at the results a little way further into the webinar. In the next 60 minutes, we're going to be talking about a problem many teams recognize immediately. We are collecting more and more data from apps, wearables, and patient platforms. But when it comes to reimbursement decisions, it's not always obvious how to turn those signals into evidence that health technology assessment bodies actually trust. So today we'll focus on three practical questions. What counts as convincing patient-derived evidence for payers and HTA bodies like NICE and GBA and CADTH. How do you translate digital and real-world data into outcomes decision makers care about? Things like better health, fewer hospital visits, and value for money. And what does good look like in practice? The study designs, the guardrails against bias, and the cross-functional alignment that makes this work repeatable. So that's the platform, that's the shop front, as it were, that's our stall. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. You'll see the polls during the session. Please do take part. It helps us compare experiences. And we'll show the poll results shortly, as I mentioned. And if you have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A chat as we go. If we don't get to everything live, we'll capture themes for follow-up. All right, with that, let's dive in. David, let me come to you first, if I may, with the first question for the discussion. And that is the biggest mistake that teams make and what you think the fix is. What is the biggest mistake you see when teams try to convert digital health data into HTA-ready evidence? And what's the fix?
Well, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So I think that, first understanding what the problem is, and then what is the fix is the second step, and it's not that trivial, which is why we are here today, right? But I think a significant mistake that teams are making is neglecting to engage with the HTA early enough, as early as possible in the process, I would say. I think, the oversight often results in, collection of data that while you may have a lot of data, that is very rich and informative, it does not necessarily align with the specific evidence and requirements that those HTA organizations have. So, for instance, team may gather extensive data from digital health interventions, but fail to address specific outcomes and endpoints that the bodies are prioritizing. And just, to mention few, quality adjusted life years, cost effectiveness, and so I think that's really the main challenge is making sure you engage early enough with the HTA bodies to address all of that. And how to fix it? Again, go and talk early enough, engage in a dialogue with the HTA stakeholders. I mean, those things are new to them as well. So I think the earlier you have a discussion around that, the better. Get a landscape of, what are the relevant guidelines and frameworks that the bodies have in place, and ensure that your data collection methods are designed to with those requirements in mind. So I think if you do that, you have a better chance to achieve something that the HTA organizations will validate.
Emma, what would you say are the biggest mistakes that you see when teams try to convert?
I fully agree with everything that David said, and I would add on to it a little bit that The challenge is definitely linking that patient level data with those HTA outcomes, and that's from a data quality perspective. It's equally from a validation of those surrogate or digital endpoints that you're adopting. And that's where I think we struggle a little bit. We can collect all this information, but has anybody sort of validated that technology or that endpoint as being representative of a benefit that correlates or translates into reduced health resource utilization, or as David said, QALYs, etc. And that's the link that we're really missing right now. So we can use even an Apple Watch to determine whether there's an improvement in gait or a increase in speed. But at the same time, does that mean that the patient has less falls, that they're going to the hospital less? Does it mean that they're working more? And so we see a change in that labor workforce sort of parallel. So I think that's where we're still missing it. And as David said, right now, because there are not the extensive, clear frameworks, it's really about that early dialogue to validate whether this is an approach that would be acceptable and determining whether you're ready to take on the burden of validating an endpoint or whether you're looking to partner with somebody to do that. There are already many providers that have that investigatory grade biomarker available for you to sort of correlate, but it may not be regulatory level. So are you going to kind of partner and get it there together, or is this something that you're kind of going to do yourself, or you're really looking for a partner who's already established this?
Right, great. But I mean, talking about endpoints, let's go into the second question, which we've been researching, which is which endpoints are you seeing land best with HTA bodies at the moment? Clinical outcomes, HRU, PROs, productivity, or something else? Emma.
Yeah. And I think
Sorry.
all yeah, I mean right now it's still very much the outcomes ones that are resonating and those that can be directly linked. So the impact to the quality of life, the impact to the cost, the reduced health resource utilization burden, reduced hospitalizations, reduced acute care, potentially time trade-off, etc. So it's more those that are still resonating rather than things that are purely a patient benefit from my perspective right now. And David, I don't know how you feel.
David, yes, what's your take?
Pretty similar. I think that the bodies are increasingly favoring now endpoints that are demonstrating clinical and economical value. I think this is really what they are after. Are you able to improve clinical outcome? Are you able to deliver significant cost savings to the healthcare system? I think this is what they are after. And it's about reducing, thinking of oncology, reducing mortality rates, reducing disease progression, um, again, improve clinical outcomes. So those are what's after. But I think it's also a lot and more about resource utilization. This is becoming pivotal. I think all healthcare systems are trying to reduce cost and improve efficiency of the system. So, reflecting how digital health interventions can reduce costs by minimizing, for example, hospital visits, enhancing or increasing the amount of remote monitoring you can do or optimize treatment pathways. This is also, I think, something that those days the bodies are after, and this is evolving more and more into that direction, I believe.
Great. Now, fascinating area to discuss more is about how the data is one thing, the conclusions you draw from it are another thing, and then there's another thing, which is the actions that happen as a result of that insight. So, what's the difference between a data story, which is all very interesting, but hey, it's got to add up to something, and a value narrative that can genuinely change payer decisions? David, what do you see a distinction between the data story and the value narrative?
Yeah, there is a huge difference. At the same time, they are very linked and tied together because one depends on each other. Um, you can have very successful data and great data that, you know, and a story that's focusing on presenting quantitative findings in a very compelling way, with nice graphs, with a lot of, some great statistics like we are used to. But the question is, what is this data telling you? And if you want to engage stakeholders by making the data accessible and understandable, um, the value narrative goes beyond that. It goes beyond the data that you are, that articulates the significance of the findings. And you really want to say, okay, this is the data that I have, but this data demonstrates that I can save money. This data demonstrates that I can maintain patients on treatment longer. This data demonstrates that I can, create whatever value for the patient or for the HCP or for the payer. And this is really the difference. I think, data is one thing. It's the basis, it's the foundation, but that's not good enough. Then you need to link it to those clinical outcomes or the economical outcomes that we have discussed earlier. So both are very important, and you need one for the second.
Emma, obviously these two areas, the data story and the value narrative, are completely symbiotic and
Yeah.
codependent, as it were.
Mhm.
What's your view? Well, how do you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the HTA bodies don't give you that reimbursement based on the data points alone. And as David mentioned, the data points are truly critical for defining your value story. But if we think about it like from, for example, diabetes, the digital platform, you can measure now with continuous glucose measuring, those glucose readings, those time points. You can also measure the app adherence for a patient, so how motivated they are themselves. But does that translate into anything? And what you need to then create with that is that value narrative that says, well, because the patient is actively monitoring their glucose on I don't know, an hourly continuous, manner, then as a result, we see reduced complications, which then leads to reduced hospitalizations, which leads to long-term cost reduction. So I think that sort of is how the kind of two parts come together. So it's not just saying that we wanted to look at X and we measured Y, and then this is what we saw. It's really building that into the benefit that can be understood and connecting the dots for the organizations.
Great. Well, I want to come on to the next question in a second with you, Emma. But before we do that, we've got some uh, early results from our poll question. And I hope everyone can see those. What is your biggest challenge in converting digital health data into HTA-ready evidence? And you've got a choice. 56% think data quality and standardization is the biggest challenge. 24% think demonstrating clinical and economic value. 16% navigating regulatory uncertainty, and 4% resource and expertise constraints. So, food for thought there. Before we go on to the questions, also, we're going to have poll two. So, stand by for that, please, everybody. The second poll question, which we'll have the answers again in a little way into the webinar, which is which endpoints are resonating most with HTA bodies in your experience? Which endpoints are resonating most with HTA bodies in your experience? And the suggested answer options, I think, and we've got are patient-reported outcomes with clinical correlation, cost offset, and health care utilization, intermediate clinical outcomes with established link, and effectiveness of data. Comparative effectiveness data. Sorry. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, please do ponder those and vote. Um, uh, please give us your insights so that we can reveal what we collectively think. Emma, let's just jump on to the next question while we wait for those results. Um, just can you share a real example where digital health data strengthened the value story? And what data did you use, and what changed in the decision or in the conversation?
I think David might be better placed to kind of answer this one, but I think, from my perspective, it's maybe looking at things like remote patient monitoring, as David just mentioned, in the kind of oncology setting or in the heart failure setting. What are you able to do that can keep that closer connection with the patient, that anticipates when there is progression, disease progression, or an acute event, that means that you can intervene before it fully progresses, or before a patient has a cardiac event, which is more costly. So I think from my perspective, I would see that the remote patient monitoring perspective is going to create that additional strength and value to your proposition.
David, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree. And one example I can bring, it's a connected or digital health solution that we have at Merck now for many years. I mean, it started about 20 years ago with our first connected drug delivery device. So 20 years ago, before the first iPhone or just together. So someone had a great vision in the company. But so we have basically a digital health ecosystem for patients or children that have growth hormone deficiencies. And we have been able to demonstrate through an independent study that patients that are using the connected system are in fact growing more than patients that are not using the ecosystem. And the study is demonstrating that, it's, over, treatment can go, 5-7 years, up to a difference of 4 centimeters, which is huge for children that are small, that lose confidence if they remain small. So for a child to be able to grow more, it makes a big difference. And it's not about the molecule. I mean, Merck, like many others, have probably the same molecule, but the fact that we have this digital health ecosystem, so it's a drug delivery device that is sending data to the cloud every time you inject. The data is then collected and shared with the HCP. The patient can monitor adherence, and this is, of course, encouraging him to be even more adherent to treatment and then improve the medical outcome. This is, I think, a good demonstration that if you have the right data, but it's not only about the data, as we said, it's about the so what. So here, the data allows the physician to take better decision. It's kind of a clinical decision support tool. So it's helping both the patients and the HCP. And thanks to this real world data, we're able to demonstrate that the patient that is using those digital solutions have better medical outcome than others. So I think that that's a good example that, you need to have the data, you need to have the right data, but you need to pay attention to the so what as well. Okay, what do you do with this data? And if it's used either by the patient or by the healthcare professional for meaningful decisions and changing behaviors as well, then you can get better medical outcome. We have demonstrated also economic efficiencies there. So this is, I think, a good example of that.
Very good. Yeah. Just to talk about study designs now that are working and that are proving successful. What study designs are you using most? Pragmatic studies, registries, external controls, synthetic comparators, and hybrid models. I mean, there's a selection there. Which designs are you most drawn to,
Emma, do you want
David?
to take this
David,
one?
or is it Emma? Okay, I'll go for Emma if you prefer. Yes.
Yes.
I think we can yeah, and I would also piggyback a little bit on the last question too with this. So there was also recently a study that was conducted by NICE to assess a smartphone app that administered cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And in their assessment, they were able to demonstrate that the use of this app meant that there was sustained sleep improvements with the participants in this study, and actually a reduced reliance on medication. So I think these meaningful outputs in digital therapeutics can actually also lead to reduced medication and not necessarily additional medication or right medication, which I think is really exciting. I think what is possible with these sorts of tools is definitely pragmatic research. I think an ability to be inclusive as well, because a lot of this can then be done in a decentralized fashion, which means that you are able to increase equity and availability and accessibility to people. I think importantly, this is going to be driven more by patients in the future. We are all starting to own our own health data a little bit more, and we're all starting to take more interest in what that means and being able to understand it. And while our technology so far may not give us the context of ourselves, I think that's something that we need to consider is coming relatively soon. And so I certainly think that there will be more into observational cohorts and maybe even more of a registry perspective where I can opt in and I can even monetize my participation and my sort of regular sharing of my information with health authorities, with payers. Maybe there's opportunity that I can do this also to reduce my premiums for my health insurance. So I think there will be a lot more of this observational, registry-driven, patient-driven research moving forwards.
David, what's your how does any of that chime with what your perspective is?
Yeah, I mean there are different methods for different cases, but I think what is happening more and more is, I mean, is that with digital health, I think we are moving towards a direction where we use more pragmatic and hybrid models. I think pragmatic, that is particularly valuable to assess the effectiveness of the intervention in a real world setting. That's to provide insights that are more applicable to everyday clinical practice. And the hybrid models, the beauty of that is that that combine elements of randomized controlled trials with real world evidence, right? And this is really gaining popularity, I think, as they can offer a more comprehensive view of an intervention's impact, while at the same time it's addressing the limitations of traditional study designs, which can be often, if you just stick to the old way of doing it, it can be very cumbersome and very costly. So I think those are the two methods that I think that we are going towards, which is, as I said, hybrid and pragmatic models.
Okay, let's move on to a huge topic now, Emma. If we can perhaps start with you, about bias risks with digital RWE. What are the top two bias risks? Let's just take two. I think it's going to keep us busy. That you worry about with digital real world evidence, and how do you manage them?
Yeah, I think the top one would be that selection bias and that digital native population that's going to probably be ahead. Although saying that, I went into my local village shop the other day and there was a 70 plus person paying with their Apple Watch, and I was really astounded. So I think this is probably a fear and a worry that's disappearing, and people are becoming far more technologically savvy than I would like to accept. But I think, access to that technology is going to be challenging, and some oftentimes this technology is really useful for those with cognitive impairment. So can you balance that ability of them being aware enough and able enough to use it, that it actually is can correlate with something? So that the other part would be that kind of confounding causality bias that's potentially associated with some of these solutions as well. But I think and then back to the other part is that validation, that at the moment there are very few technologies that are fully validated for use in clinical practice, for routine patient monitoring, for all of these things. And that's where I think we really need to get that acceleration.
Lovely. David, your top two of probably quite a long list. I think everyone's got one. What would you say were the biggest bias problems that?
Yeah, and to be
Yeah.
honest, I've not much to add to what Emma said. I mean, agree, 100%. I think the selection bias and, making sure that you're using, the right participants to the study um, with the right technology, and that they all have, uh, you have a representative pool of patients, right? I mean, we have engaged, just as an example, right? We have digital health solutions used, for a population that is pretty young and tech savvy, and we have similar solutions for a population that is elderly. Uh, and the motivation of those patients to use digital health solutions, not only that the motivation is different and the willingness to use it is different, but also their capabilities to use it on a regular basis is different. So that's really one that you need to take into account. And then, as Emma said, the information bias, making sure that the data you collect refers to something that is, well defined, that you understand the context, and the environment in which the data was collected, and that you can really trace back all that information to build, an end-to-end narrative and create mean of with this data. Not that is not completely out of the blue or out of context. So fully aligned with what Emma said.
Okay, well, we've talked a lot about theory and about design and about data. Let's talk about execution. Actually, when the rubber hits the road, what's the most painful part of actually putting things into action, into execution? What's the most painful part in practice? Data linkage, missing data, device variability, definitions, governance, regulatory interpretations. A very long list of pitfalls, or something else. Emma, coming to you perhaps about execution. What's the what keeps you awake at night?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the data integration and the data linkage, so that kind of cleaning and plumbing. And I think when you try to do that at scale, it's very difficult. So although you might have a combined consultation from a HTA perspective, what you'll find is actually putting that into practice on a local level is increasingly hard. Perhaps locally, not every country has the same data available. So this kind of one size fits all is tricky to achieve. And as you mentioned, also missing data. And what do you do in that case? So if a patient has sort of 30% missing data, how are you dealing with all of this? So it's certainly, an operational burden as you consider this. And then there's always device variability and potentially difference in defining endpoints. And that also maybe on a country level, there is a slight difference in what's kind of considered normal level in one country versus what's considered at an abnormal level. So these sorts of things mean that this concept at scale is quite difficult. And then really it's those the governance and legal and regulatory uncertainty. And then those you have to tie back, as David started with, is that early dialogue, that early partnership, and working through it together. But those would be probably my top challenges of making this work in practice.
David, you've got a long list to choose from, and maybe you could bring some of your own perspectives too. Perhaps what do you think are the most painful parts of execution?
Um, I think it was reflected, I think, in the poll, if I remember well the results. I think the quality and the standardization of the data. I think in one of the major pain points is, especially that very often in a study you are dealing with different digital biomarkers, different wearables, different sources of information, and and we know that today, a big part of being able to use the data in the proper manner is really to number one, to make sure that you have quality data, and number two, that it's all standardized so that you can, bring it into a decent data lake and analyze it and really look at it in a at those various sources in a good way, when you bring together EHRs, etc. So that's one thing. And number two is also often what happens is that you have so much data that you don't realize that you have gaps or that you have missing data, and then even though you are expecting to get something end to end, for example, or something that is representative of different cases, you realize that there are things that are missing, and then it becomes very difficult to address those gaps. So those are, I mean, again, the challenges are endless. I think we are getting better, and that's why it's important to also build the right and a very strict governance from day one around all of that, so that you don't have any surprise or disappointment by the day you come and start looking at the data.
Thank you very much for that. Let's see if we can take a review of the poll results for the second poll, which you may remember was which endpoints are resonating most with HTA bodies in your experience. And we have no clear front runner here, or there are two equal front runners here. Cost offset and healthcare utilization sits neck and neck with comparative effectiveness data. Patient-reported outcomes with clinical correlation comes next, and trailing those is the intermediate clinical outcomes with established linked. So a bit of a mixed view there. Sounds like a lot of things resonating. So let's go on to the third poll now, which we'll be asking now and reviewing it towards the end of the webinar. And that's at what stage in the product lifecycle are you integrating digital real-world evidence? At what stage in the product lifecycle are you integrating digital real-world evidence? So if you could think that over while we continue with our questions, and give your thoughts. We'll have another look at what the collective or what we all think of that. But let's just dive in now to the last few questions that we have in the time that we have available. And I'll be coming to Emma again here on who needs to align early. So, Emma, who do you think needs to be aligned early for this to work? And again, we've got a list of questions here. It's a multiple choice type of webinar today. HEOR, medical, digital, clinical, market access, data science, legal, or field teams. You've got a list there. So who needs to be aligned for this to work and get aligned early? I think early is the critical one here.
Yeah, I think everybody. I think this needs to be, and I think standardly now across many companies, this integrated access and use evidence generation is brought in earlier. When we prepared for this webinar, we talked about the fact that this is part of a bigger life cycle, and it's difficult to balance that. When do you get everybody involved, and when do you invest all of that versus, potentially not actually getting to a marketing authorization point? So you do need to balance that. But I think certainly HEOR, medical, clinical, development, however you name them, digital, potentially even new business to identify those right partners, potentially, the data science, biostatistics, absolutely, to be able to, as David just mentioned, create that linkage, create that database that's going to be able to kind of link all of this information and data, legal, compliance, regulatory, privacy, AI law, all of these are going to be kind of more important earlier as you start to build this into a kind of scalable strategy. Because I think, it is, like I said, difficult to make that call. When do you do it? But the earlier, the better, that you don't get too far down the kind of path of a clinical development program without that consultation of, will this work with, or will this resonate with the HTA authorities, or even, is this going to be meaningful for physicians? If I give you some solution that's going to mean that the physician needs to enter 30 data points to determine something, then I would argue that that's not going to improve clinical practice. So I think the field teams are equally important early on, because they can start to kind of understand from a physician perspective, is this also valuable for them, that they would also support and support a regulatory submission too.
David, you've got that list there, that drop down HEOR, medical, digital, clinical, market access, data science, and so on. Um,
yeah, yeah,
do any of those need to get their acts together early?
no, no, absolutely. And my response to you would be all of the above. Right. So we know pharma is a complex world. We know clinical studies are a complex world. We know that HTA authorities have are requiring a lot and are very strict on what they are asking for, and for good reasons. So yeah, I mean, the earlier you involve all of those above functions, because as Emma nicely shared, they all have an important role. If it's economic, if it's clinical outcome, if it's understanding the market, if it's making sure you have the right technology, and data scientists making sure that you do it all in a compliant way, and so on and so forth. I mean, they all have a role, and when we used to say in the company, it takes a village to build a right digital health solution, but also to bring a drug to the market. So my answer in short is, the earlier you can involve as many people as you can. It doesn't make things easy, because it means that, you have to deal with a lot of stakeholders. And that's, I would say, the most difficult challenge of the daily work, right? How do you bring all those stakeholders around the same, ambition? But yeah, the earlier you engage all of them, the better.
Excellent. Okay. Let's turn now to timing in the life cycle. Um, so the question, Emma, for you, if you don't mind taking this on first, is at what point are you bringing this into the life cycle, and what is too late? So, describe what too late looks like from your perspective.
Yeah, I think it's really got to be in your strategy in phase two. I don't think you can leave it to phase three. I think phase three and advanced in phase three is very much too late. I would say as well that one group we possibly missed in that previous discussion is patients, and I think patients are going to be again increasingly important about being involved early. We often look at the patient journey and the patient perspective from the perspective of a physician. So often our research is focused on understanding how physicians are treating patients, but that doesn't actually tell us everything that's happening in that patient journey. And I can give you a great example actually from my own mother. She had a recent operation. She got an infection in that. She went to occupational health. Occupational health looked at her and they said, yes, you need some antibiotics. This appointment was in a hospital setting, but they had no physician available that could prescribe her some antibiotics. So she went away. She then tried to get antibiotics from the pharmacy, could not. She then tried to get an appointment for a triage within her own GP practice, could not. She called, the standard number and got a call back at 1:30 a.m. the next day. And then that person said, yes, you probably really do need some antibiotics. I will make sure you get an appointment tomorrow. So that patient journey and the potential to avoid all of that by having something else in place is really important, because actually when we're looking at that patient journey from a very, HCP perspective, we don't understand all of that. So actually our benefit, our savings, our value story is maybe even greater than we imagine. So I think we definitely need to bring this in by phase two, and we definitely also need to be bringing in patients to really understand their journey and how that impact may be magnified beyond what we imagine.
Great. Okay. We'll probably have some more questions that will come in from some of our people listening today. But David, I just want to ask you for your take on this, on the timing in the cycle and when it's too late. At what point are you bringing this into the life cycle? And what does too late look like for you?
Yeah, I think that I don't know if there is too late, but the later you start, the more difficult it is, and then you need to catch up. So I agree with Emma that phase one is probably too early. Phase three is probably um, in some cases too late. So phase two ideally is the right moment to get in. I mean, we are working now on some, hybrid medicines, where you know that in the US you have the PIDers that is becoming an option, which means that you can add a digital health solution on the label of a drug without making it a combination product. You can, have a drug and then add a digital health solution to the label. If you are able to demonstrate that your digital solution is, improving clinical outcome, um, and that you can do at any moment, right? Of course, it's better to have it from the beginning, but you give the option to the physician to either prescribe only the molecule or to prescribe the molecule together with the digital solution, right? So I think ideally, yes, start in phase two, and if you are able to have that, at launch, that's good. But sometimes it's difficult to do this type of studies before you have the drug fully approved, and many companies or teams don't want to launch a drug at the same time as digital solution because it's adding risk, probably, that you don't want. I mean, getting your approval for a new drug is already so risky and so expensive that you don't want to risk it. So you may want to run that in parallel, or start it, after launch. So I think depending on what's the purpose of your digital health solution, um, I think you can start at different point in times. It's always better to start it early, and I would say, ideally phase two, but it can work as well, in phase three or even post-launch as part of the life cycle management of your treatment.
Do you think, I mean, how would you balance? This is like a naive question, but I think it comes up all the time with anybody who handles data and statistics and any kind of data value stories. How do you balance speed with methodological credibility? Is that a fair division, fair distinction?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I mean, credibility and methodology is key, right? I mean, you cannot start an exercise like that if you don't have the right a good method that is defined, if you don't know, step by step who is going to do what and how and according to which process and workflow, right? So. Speed is usually not defined by the methodology. I think speed is usually defined by enrollment of patients. What kind of clinical outcomes you want to validate. How long is your study going to last? Uh, but I don't encourage you to start a study without having the right methodology.
Right, indeed. Yeah, Emma, let me come to you with a question, which I've been asked to ask from I think from some of the discussions that are going on behind the scenes. What how I mean, could you just talk a little bit about the solutions to improving data quality and standardization? It sort of refers to our first poll about the challenges of converting digital health data into HTA-ready evidence. Um, what solutions might we start looking at to improve the quality and standardization of data for the HTA-ready evidence?
Yeah, it's a really good one. I think is establishing the right partnerships, credible data partners. And I think we are seeing that generally across the board that that data availability is increasing. We, for a long time, have been, aware of what's possible in the US and kind of a little bit envious of what isn't possible outside of the US. But I do think that in the coming years there will be um, additional sort of advances in credible data availability and being able to create some of that linkage. But yeah, it is very tricky. It remains very tricky right now. I don't know, David, if you want to comment on it.
No, I agree that this is tricky just because, I mean, you're using different sources of data and, and I think, those days, not only in digital, but across the board, I think a big part of effort that we need to go through it's cleaning the data that you want to use. It's true. I think for thinking it's a different topic, but thinking of AI, right? I think that's also an important, I would say, bottleneck. How do you make sure that you have good data, quality data, and in a form that it can be used before you start, playing with it. So it remains a challenge, and yeah, you got to find your way through it, either by partnerships or by doing it internally. But there's no way around that.
And I think to add on to your point is with the AI is what point do we start to look at more synthetic data? So more of that generated data rather than that can maybe reduce bias versus having that challenge.
Yeah, and I don't remember, I can't quote the name, but I've talked recently to a professor in France that has already got for her work approval from the French authorities, and they're trying to get it validated in the US. But to demonstrate that with generated data, from algorithm that they have built, they can use this type of data to represent patients and thus enroll less patients for studies and again be more efficient and go faster. So that's yeah, that I think the next step. But how can you replace patients with generated data again without new biases that were those biases we were talking about earlier?
Mm-hmm.
I suppose we're sort of this brings to mind the first poll question again, which is the best way to demonstrate clinical value through digital health data. If your data has been really, I mean, AI can do a lot to work with unstructured data, and it can do a great deal to find value where historically it would have been a nightmare to try to do that. Do you think that can feed into clinical value because you're actually showing that the real story is in that in unstructured data because of AI it can now be found, it can be revealed. David, what do you think?
I don't think it's a value on its by itself. It can help you demonstrate value that you couldn't before because because AI helps you again, be smarter than humans and faster and more organized. So the data should be there, right? It's not, you cannot invent data, you cannot change use cases. It's just a matter of if today you need a team of 5 people and I don't know 3 months to come to conclusions, maybe with AI it will go much faster, and you will be able to to retrieve value to endpoints that you were not before. That's very possible.
Yeah. Emma, I don't know if you want to just touch on that or
Yeah,
about.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, if we think about our traditional approach of, a chart review from an EHR, as David said, it's always been there, but it's, you may have the budget to, I don't know, look at 100 patients from 10 different sites, and you're paying somebody to do a manual chart review and extract information because you're interested in that qualitative unstructured information versus just those kind of boxes that are checked within a system. And I think that's where AI really can help you extract that all of the information from the notes in a much faster at scale approach that allows you to potentially analyze more data and potentially extract more valuable information and create new hypotheses and look at it that way. So I think certainly there's potential.
Now let me just go to a question which was coming from one of our viewers of the webinar, Mark asks, do you have any experience with the value of data coming from basket trials? Basket trials, Emma, no. Okay,
Sorry,
simple
no.
one.
No,
Simple one. David, any comments on basket trials?
no, unfortunately not.
Okay, right. We'll pass on that. We're just going to do the results to poll three now. And hopefully we might just have some last minute questions to come in because we've got a little bit of time to play with. Still about eight or so minutes left on our slot. But otherwise we all get to have an early bath, which is nice. So let's look at the answers to poll number three. At what stage in the product lifecycle are you integrating digital RWE? And again, another mixed bag here, really. From the design phase leads, we've got throughout the entire life cycle, the design phase answer is 36%, throughout the entire life cycle is 28%. And then we've got post-launch for market access at 22% of respondents and down to playing catch up, 14%. So a spread there, no conclusive stages that are voted in as front runners. And I think we're just going to go to our thank yous now. This has been a really stimulating and fascinating insight. I really want to say a really, really big thank you to our lovely panelists today. David Braun, the Global Head of Connected Health and Device Business Solutions at Merck. David, thank you so much for your contributions today. Really insightful. Thank you. And Emma Vitalini, you were going to be the moderator on this panel, and you very kindly and with great deftness switched hats at the last second. And for that, we are very grateful. Emma at Vitalini at head of former head. Is that right? I think it's former head. Sorry.
Yeah.
I made a mistake there. Former head of Global Digital Health Technology at Amgen. Thank you both very much indeed. And thank you to our lovely listeners and your poll votes. If you could make any last comments on this, what is your overall big picture statement about where we're at with this? Emma, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Just tell us what's the top of your agenda right now? Where's the buzz here when you talk to colleagues about this?
I think it's anticipating the points to emerge. I think not getting distracted by the bright, shiny objects and the promises and over promises and being realistic. Important, as we've said consistently through the panel, just having those early discussions and engagement with the regulatory authorities, with the reimbursement authorities, um, and helping to define new ways of demonstrating value and value that they will accept, that also brings value for the patients and not just from a kind of reimbursement perspective. I think this really offers so many opportunities for the future, and we need to be committed to being part of that journey.
Great. David, closing thoughts. What would you like to our listeners to take away with them after this? The top line statement you'd like to bring here.
Yeah, so top line will be very short. So I think this topic is complex. It's not easy. And you get to engage early with a lot of stakeholder management and often in pharma, those digital health solutions are not as strategic as the drug. So it may add some challenges in the way you engage with all the stakeholders. But keep stay excited, because I think digital can make a difference for patient, and keep the patient in front of your mind. Have always the patient at the center of what you do, and have you and your team thinking that it was the battle, it was the fight, it was failing and retrying, because digital is not always successful, and the beauty of digital is that you can adjust and improve pretty quickly. So always have the patient and the benefit of the patient in your line of sight, and never give up. Things are evolving. I think digital is offering more and more opportunities, and I think that the bodies are also more and more open to what we are bringing to them, again, to the benefit of the patients.
That's it. Now, I said we'd all be having an early bath, and but suddenly, right at the last minute, we've had another question come in from our listeners, and so forgive me. I would be letting them down if I didn't at least run it by you. You can just say no, of course, if you don't have any strong views. What's the best way? Is the question. What's the best way to navigate different regulatory requirements in different European countries? Big question, actually. So take that as however you like. David, I'm going to ask you to go for that one. Best way to navigate different regulatory requirements in different European countries.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's the good way, but it might be the best way. So first of all, the landscaping exercise you do at the beginning. Make sure, depending on in which countries you want to, to submit and get approvals and launch your solution, landscape it again at the beginning to understand what are those differences and making sure that you address those differences in expectations as part of the design of your study. Right? If you go and design a study without thinking of that, then it might be too late. So landscape all your regulatory requirements depending on the countries where you want to go to market, and include that in the design of your study. And then it's a case by case. Work locally with those markets. Make sure that you have the right regulatory experts. That you are. It's like in math. Find a common denominator to most of the countries, and then adjust and have that implemented in your design, so that by the time you finish your design, you have what you need for each of those countries.
Navigating different regulatory requirements in European countries.
Yeah, I think to add on to what David just shared, I think the great advantage with digital is that it is more cost effective in some ways to be able to generate all of that evidence locally. So whereas in the past it was tricky and very expensive to be able to ensure that you generated that local level data that supports the submission, I think with digital it becomes more feasible. So I think it does become easier to address, but I think there are going to be strategic decisions in some markets. It may be a strategic advantage, in others it may not, and I think also ensuring that you build in the flexibility for that, and not necessarily having it as an add-on and something maybe that is kind of optional.
Fantastic. Well, I've said my thank yous already, so I won't go through all of that again. You've been very kind and generous, both of you, and thank you very much for your patience with the late questions. It only remains for me to say thanks to our lovely audience too. Please tune in for the next webinars, which we run regularly.